In calisthenics, there are a lot of rep ranges that you can train in, but how do you decide which one is right for you? In this video, I'm going to explain the different types of rep ranges and their uses. The gist of this video is that all of them form a repetition continuum, with strength at one end, endurance at the other, and hypertrophy somewhere in the middle. The more intense an exercise is, the more strength-focused it is, and the less intense an exercise is, the more endurance-focused it is. And the intensity of an exercise is defined by how many reps you can perform of it. The less reps you can perform, the more intense it is, and vice versa. With that out of the way, let's get into the different types of rep ranges and their uses. The first is the 1 to 3 rep range. This is the most intense rep range and is useful only for developing peaking strength or your 1 rep max. If you're a street lifter and your goal is a 100 kilogram dip, then this is the rep range where you will be spending a lot of your time, especially before your competitions. But if you're just a regular person who's looking to get stronger and build more muscle, this rep range won't really be useful to you. That's because while it's perfect for building your 1 rep max strength, it's not as good for building general strength because the volume is so low and the stimulus to fatigue ratio is just terrible. If you can only do 1 pull-up to get enough volume for maximal strength gains, you would have to do like 20 sets, but given the intensity of this rep range, you would literally die before set 15. This rep range is even worse for building muscle because maximal hypertrophy requires even more volume than maximal strength gains. So if you just want to build more muscle, definitely avoid this rep range. The stimulus to time ratio for this rep range is also horrible. Since you're doing so little volume in each set, you will have to do a lot of sets, which will make your workout extremely long. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you won't build any general strength and muscle in this rep range. You will, but those gains will be far from optimal because you will be too fatigued to accumulate enough training volume for them. Training in this rep range is like wanting to write a book, but only writing 1 letter every time you sit down to write. Eventually, you will realize that to finish the book while you're still alive, you will have to write more than 1 letter every time you sit down to write, which is the same as realizing that to build muscle and strength optimally, you will need to do less intense exercises to accumulate more training volume. In conclusion, the 1 to 3 rep range is best for developing peak strength, okay for developing general strength, and bad for building muscle. Next up is the 3 to 5 rep range, which is best for developing basic strength because it lets you train heavy and accumulate enough training volume while not getting you too fatigued at the same time. It's better for building muscle than the 1 to 3 rep range, but not ideal because it'll still be hard to get enough training volume to maximize muscle growth. Don't get me wrong, you will gain a good amount of muscle in this rep range, but you won't maximize it. To do that, you will have to use the following rep ranges. It's also okay for developing peaking strength because it's still quite intense, but not ideal. The ideal rep range for that is the 1 to 3 rep range. The only thing that this rep range is bad at is maximizing either peaking strength or hypertrophy, especially for advanced athletes, because while it's okay for both of them simultaneously, it can't be the best option for either one of them. In conclusion, the 3 to 5 rep range is best for developing general strength, okay for developing peaking strength and building muscle, and bad for maximizing either one of them. Next up is the 5 to 10 rep range. This is the rep range where you will start building serious amounts of muscle because finally you will be able to accumulate enough training volume to stimulate optimal muscle growth. It's also much better for developing correct technique than the previous rep ranges, since it's not so intense that all you can think about is not shitting your pants. Here you can finally start to focus on your technique. It's okay for developing basic strength, but not ideal, because the intensity is a bit too light to maximize it. Don't get me wrong, you will build a lot of strength in this rep range, but if you just want to get as strong as possible, the 3 to 5 rep range will be better for you. It's also okay for isolation work, but not ideal because it can be too tough on the joints. For example, if I'm doing really intense tricep extensions for 5 reps, my elbows will hurt like mad, but if I'm doing easier tricep extensions for 15 reps, my elbows will feel fine. The only thing that this rep range is bad at is developing peaking strength because it's just not as intense as it needs to be to do that. In conclusion, the 5 to 10 rep range is best for building muscle and developing correct technique, okay for developing basic strength and isolation work, and bad for developing peaking strength. Next up is the 10 to 20 rep range. This is the best rep range for building muscle on average because it accommodates both compound and isolation movements. For compound movements, you will bias more towards the 10 to 15 rep range, but for isolation movements, you will bias more towards the 15 to 20 rep range. It's also good for developing correct technique, but not ideal because it'll start to break down at higher reps due to muscle burn and fatigue. Correct technique development requires that most of your reps in a set are done with correct technique, and overall, the 5 to 10 rep range will be the best for that. However, this rep range is not so good at developing strength because it's too light for that. Complete beginners will build strength here, but if you're more advanced, you will have to spend your time in lower rep ranges to do that. This rep range is also bad for people who are bad at going close to failure because it's easy to get tired really far from failure and end the set, which is not how you're going to build a lot of muscle. Someone might be able to do 18 reps in a set but stop at 13 because they just got bored and tired from doing so many reps. In conclusion, this rep range is best for building muscle on average, okay for developing correct technique and strength in beginners, and bad for building strength in more advanced athletes and for people who are bad at going close to failure. Next up is the 20 to 30 rep range. This rep range is good for building muscle with isolation exercises, especially if you're having joint problems with lower rep ranges. It's also good for people who are coming back from an injury because the intensity is so light that you're much less likely to re-injure the same body part. Re-injuring something is much easier than injuring it for the first time, so keep that in mind. This rep range is okay for building muscle overall, but not ideal because after some time, your body will get used to it and not build as much muscle as it did when you first started training in this rep range. That's because while the metabolite pathway, which is mostly trained in this rep range, is quite powerful, after some time your body will adapt to it and you will have to do even more volume to get the same growth, which is just not practical. This rep range is bad at building strength because the intensity is just not there at all. Complete beginners will build some strength, but more advanced athletes will not. It's also bad for people who are bad at going close to failure, for the same reasons that I explained in the 10 to 20 rep range. In conclusion, the 20 to 30 rep range is best for building muscle with isolation exercises, especially if you're coming back from an injury or you're having joint problems with the lower rep ranges. It's okay for building muscle, but not for long-term growth because your body will adapt to it. And it's bad for building strength and for people who are bad at going close to failure. And the last rep range on the list is the 30 plus rep range. This rep range should only be used for rehab purposes or for building muscular endurance. For example, if you're injured, then you should strengthen the injured area with very low intensity exercises in this rep range. Or if you want to be able to do 50 pull-ups in a row, then you should also train in this rep range. But if neither one of those are your goals, then this rep range will be basically useless to you. In conclusion, the 30 plus rep range is best for rehab purposes and for building muscular endurance, and bad for everything else. Now let's talk about how these rep ranges apply to isometrics, because most of us want to achieve cool isometric skills, but as you probably know, in isometric exercises, you're not doing any reps, you're just holding a position. I would say that 1.5 seconds of an isometric hold equals 1 rep, so all you gotta do is multiply each rep range by 1.5 to see how these rep ranges apply to isometrics. Keep in mind that if your goal is a specific isometric position, for example the planche, your focus will be on building strength, and strength will be best developed in the lower rep ranges. I'm saying this because if you're doing an isometric exercise, your goal is not to build muscle. Isometrics are basically useless for that. Your goal is to build strength in the isometric position that you're holding, so you should bias more towards the lower rep ranges. 5 to 15 seconds will be the sweet spot. The higher rep ranges, such as 20 seconds and above, are used only for learning correct technique and conditioning your connective tissues. You're not going to build much strength in them. Now that we've covered all of the rep ranges that you can train in, let's do a quick summary for the people who just skipped to this part of the video. The 1 to 3 rep range is best for developing peaking strength, okay for developing general strength, and bad for building muscle. The 3 to 5 rep range is best for developing general strength, okay for developing peaking strength and building muscle, and bad for maximizing either one of them. The 5 to 10 rep range is best for building muscle with compound exercises and developing correct technique, okay for developing general strength and isolation work, and bad for developing peaking strength. The 10 to 20 rep range is best for building muscle on average, okay for developing correct technique and strength in beginners, and bad for building strength in more advanced athletes and for people who are bad at going close to failure. The 20 to 30 rep range is best for building muscle with isolation exercises, especially for people who are having joint problems with the lower rep ranges or people who are coming back from an injury, okay for building muscle, and bad for building strength and for people who are bad at going close to failure. And the 30 plus rep range is best for rehab purposes and building muscular endurance, and bad for everything else. Now that you have all of this information, all you need to do is figure out your goals to pick the right rep range for you. I would say that for beginners, the best rep range will be 5 to 15 because it'll let them develop strength, build muscle, and learn correct technique all at the same time. If you're more advanced, you can start to prioritize. If you just want to get as strong as possible, you should spend most of your time in the 1 to 5 rep range. But if you just want to build as much muscle as possible, you should spend most of your time in the 10 to 30 rep range. But if you decide that you want to become an endurance athlete, the 30 plus rep range will be the right one for you. But don't forget about building strength. The more strength you have, the more capacity for endurance you have. So I would recommend you to incorporate some strength training in your routine as well. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and comment down below what kind of videos you would like to see from me more. And also, if you want to know the best 9 bodyweight exercises for beginners, click the link in the description. There you will also find the link to my Instagram where I post my daily workouts, so you can follow me there as well. And make sure to have an awesome day. Peace!